So, I picked up and played AC Odyssey after playing Valhalla, and it completely blew my mind. If you're new around here, I'm not the biggest fan of Valhalla, for all of the reasons I put in this 55-minute video. But the thing is, playing Odyssey and truly exploring that game made me even more disappointed in Valhalla. If you're any sort of self-labeled AC fan, you probably have an opinion on Odyssey. And even if you're not, you know how polarizing that game is. It's really hard to find anything reasonable between this was the worst AC game to this is the best AC has ever been. Now, I'm not here to say either of those things, but I am here to tell you a story. I played AC Odyssey around launch, and that was the only time I played it before Valhalla came out. It was a 50-hour playthrough that took me a couple of months. I really wasn't trying to rush through it. I ignored most of the side content. I fast traveled every chance I could get. I really didn't dive into the RPG systems, and I tried to play like an assassin. I did the main story, and I ended up finishing the Order of the Ancients quest line, and by the end, I think it was probably like an 8 out of 10 game. You know, I'm sure I was one of those people saying, it's a good game, but a bad AC game. I'm here to tell you that going back to Odyssey in 2021, after having played Valhalla, really exposes Valhalla in the worst of ways. This is something people were telling me around launch, but I didn't have the perspective because Odyssey wasn't fresh in my mind. To me, right now, it's never been more clear that I like Odyssey and everything, and I mean everything, it represents far more than I like Valhalla. It does the whole open world RPG with dialogue choices and looting thing just so much better. And it also doesn't pretend to be a return to the older games. Now, before we start, if that coming out of my mouth is offensive to your ears, then take my purist card. Take it away from me. I don't want it. I probably don't deserve it. I love the older games. That's where I fell in love with the series, but it's painfully obvious at this point that these new ones are never going to feel like they used to. Valhalla, in fact, taught me that you can add hoods, social stealth, and one-hit assassinations, and you can still miss out on that feeling. Looks like my dog, Joe, has an opinion on this too. So, I know at this point, I'd rather play a game that knows what it's doing and does it very well, rather than a watered-down attempt at rekindling the older games. Because if we're being honest, Valhalla's attempt at this not only undermines the game, it holds back the series. I can't see this as anything other than taking a step back after returning to Odyssey. I've seen a lot of people say, at least it has assassins, at least it tries, unlike Odyssey. And that is absolute nonsense to me. Because as it stands now, stealth is better in Odyssey. That's right, you don't need a hood or a hidden blade or monks, anything like that. Stealth as a whole is more functional in that game. And that's not me seeing smoke where there's no fire. I mean, there are countless subreddit threads about this specific topic. It doesn't work. Assuming that will get patched, it's really not just that it's not working right now. It's the way the game uses those old school ideas. It feels like a waste. I blended with monks to enter a city maybe twice. If I get seen in a camp, I'm instantly revealed to anyone. Like, there's no two-layer detection system in this game. So while we can say and believe, at least it tries all day long for as long as we want to, does it really matter if it doesn't work or you're never using it? When I look at Odyssey, I see a game that pivoted away from classic elements. It trades the assassin fantasy for the Greek, mercenary misthios fantasy. For many, that's enough to feel like nails on the chalkboard. But for me, it goes beyond the surface. I see a game that knows what it is, chooses a clear path, and does everything it can to deliver on that experience. Odyssey is unquestionably, there's no doubt in my mind, it's a more well-rounded, and I'd even go as far to say, a better made game than Valhalla. Cassandra and the entire dialogue option system is just better. When I went back, this is what shocked me the most of anything. There's actual choice in this game. You can lie, you can fight, you can talk your way out of conversations. And this is not just in the main sequences. I mean, this pops up in a lot of conversations, even side content. There's true agency with these choices. Where is that in Valhalla? It's non-existent to the point where I struggle to justify choosing dialogue at all. There are key decisions that matter over 60 hours of story, but they're so few and far between. I mean, the rest of the time, why am I picking choices? This is not fun to me unless what I'm saying actually matters, and most of the time it just doesn't. With the faces too, there's this weird disconnect in Valhalla. Sometimes these characters have human emotions, but it's inconsistent. Eivor especially, she feels indifferent. Like she doesn't really care one way or another. Cassandra, by contrast, is full of life. If I choose a dialogue option, I see that reflected in her face and in her voice. Cass is extremely expressive, and it creates a visual feedback loop that makes her feel like a fully realized human being. It's the feedback, it's the connection between what you're choosing and what's being said and what you see on screen. And I can say that Cassandra meets that requirement, but I can't say that for Eivor. Side quests. I honestly cannot believe they got rid of these in Valhalla. I see people criticizing Origins and Odyssey for having fetch quests or repetitive mission design. But going back to these games, that's not my takeaway. This side content takes you on adventures with stories that have weight, that do have an impact. They unfold in multiple parts and the outcomes are not what you expected. Especially in Odyssey, where again, you're making choices that play out right in front of you. Valhalla has choices in world events, but these don't stick around long enough for me to care. And while I was choosing, those choices weren't consequential enough. I mean, I ended up focusing on the things that were annoying me, like how do I unlock a door on a house that I've seen a million times before? There's something about the tone in Odyssey that is not my favorite. I've talked about this before, but I prefer kind of a grittier, more serious game and a more serious protagonist. I think Valhalla swung for that and just missed. Odyssey has this happy-go-lucky tone, and you can feel that in the writing and the way that characters act. Marcos, for example, on Kefalonia, I wanted to punch this guy in the face more times than I could count. So while I don't love this tone, I realized this game projects its tone much better than Valhalla. I don't think of Valhalla as this brutal Viking game about surviving in England, about conquering an entire nation for your people. I think of it as a Viking theme park where I can do a lot of things, but none of them feel memorable. Odyssey is a much better RPG in every way that I can find. I'm talking about looting, gear, skills, abilities, being able to create a playstyle and build around that. Gear has benefits that you feel. It has upgrades in ways that impact gameplay. The skill tree is concise, and every single point you spend, you can feel. Valhalla is so disappointing as an RPG, it's not even funny. The gear stats and the runes, they don't even matter. Does anyone know what these numbers mean? Do these have a tangible difference that you can feel in gameplay? The skill tree especially, I mean, no choices I make in this giant web of just confusion that feels thrown in, does it have any impact at all? I mean, you basically level up 200 times by the end of the game, and you're spending these points constantly. To me, that's the cardinal sin of a skill tree in an RPG. Choices need consequences. That's the whole point. The approach to Valhalla is, sincerely, it's do whatever you want and it works. But all I ended up feeling is that I don't care about any of the stuff. It doesn't make a difference. Valhalla is supposed to have this brutal, crunchy combat system. It lets you chop off heads and zooms in for combat finishers. But after booting up Odyssey, Valhalla feels pretty much the same. But because this is an action RPG and it relies on stats and gear, it actually feels dumbed down to me. Odyssey has these flashier abilities that are a little more magical thanks to the spear, but I can't say that Valhalla improves on the combat just by toning those down a little bit. I also can't say that dual wielding or adding back shields made a major impact or improvement on gameplay. One thing I will say is that Odyssey's combat feels more polished to me. The timing, the animations, overall, it's just more responsive. I mean, you can dodge in each of these games and feel a difference in Odyssey compared to Valhalla. At the end of the day, I think that's just how Ubisoft Quebec makes games. That's how they made it. It's very polished and very functional. As much as people love to call it a Breath of the Wild clone, Immortals Phoenix Rising is the perfect example of this. Quebec knows how to make good video games. Outside of dialogue, the other thing that shocked me is the ship gameplay, the naval combat, and just sailing around. I mean, when I first played it, I used my ship more for fast traveling than sailing. In 2021, sailing around the Mediterranean captures my imagination in ways that I never thought it could. It brought me back to Black Flag, and while it's not as mechanically, interesting, in terms of exploring the world and kind of soaking in the environment, it's incredible. And it made me realize I can't believe how underwhelming the longship is in Valhalla. It's basically a horse on water. There's no combat, there's no wind, no complex mechanics, and worst of all, it's hard to steer. It really is. I ended up auto sailing or just fast traveling altogether because of how dull it is. I really wanted to buy into the longship fantasy. That's something that was sold to us before launch, but I don't know, man, ramming my boat onto the shore and going for a raid, I mean, it gets old. I wanted so much more from this. Playing Odyssey in 2021 brings me back to the phrase, it's a good game, but not a good AC game. After Valhalla, I'd argue that Odyssey is a great game, and I'm glad it didn't try to be an AC game, because we've now seen exactly what that looks like. At the end of the day, I think I found out that I just prefer a good game. To me, there's only one direction this series needs to go in, for me, and that's forward. I just can't trust Ubi to commit to old ideas without sacrificing the quality of the newer ones that are actually pretty good. I can't look at Valhalla without thinking it's just, a broken down version of Odyssey with the pieces cobbled together, and smashed in with old ideas. That is incredibly harsh, but man, that is just how I feel. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking this. You might have already written it in the comments, but a big part of how I feel about Odyssey is built off of low expectations. Going back to it, I was listening to what people were telling me about the game and how awful it was. I bought into the bad AC game narrative. And the fact is, I just didn't truly give this game a chance. I didn't fully explore it when it came out. But that also means that I had the benefit of not bringing Odyssey's expectations into Valhalla, which in my head means I gave Valhalla more of a fair shake, more of an objective look on its own. Anyways, I had this big realization that I thought was worth sharing. So I hope you guys found some value in this perspective. Oh, and one more thing. There's a narrative that this community hates games when they first come out, but returns to them years later saying, oh, they're actually amazing. But to me, that perspective makes sense, because as we get newer games, we're able to make better comparisons. The industry evolves, and we ourselves change as we play more games and, grow older. We're able to see how this series moves forward and decide, okay, now which version do I like more? It's a perfectly reasonable line of thinking. I really don't get the mocking there. The fact is, it's okay to feel a certain way about a game at any point, at launch or years later. And it's okay to change your mind when you get new information. I mean, any opinions that I give are a snapshot of how I'm feeling at that moment. Basically, don't let anyone tell you how to feel. I mean, only you know how you feel, and only you can express and explain that better than anyone else can. So before we go, let me know in the comment section below, how do you rank the most recent games in this series? I mean, now, with this perspective, I feel like it's all over the place, but give me your 1, 2, 3 of the last 3 games and tell me why. The best comment will be featured in my next Assassin's Creed video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting that like button and by subscribing to the channel. You can also hit that bell too to turn on live notifications so you don't miss my next video. You can also follow me on social media. On Twitter, I'm at jayveeonYT, and Instagram, I'm jayvee.yt. Plus, if you want to chat more with our community about Odyssey, about Valhalla, Origins, Assassin's Creed, any other games, We have a community Discord server over at discord.gg/jayveeonYT. Links for everything you need are in the description below. Big thanks to my YouTube members, Ultra fans Dave, Grass, Bill, and Cam. Super fans, Tipsy Sergey, Tarl K, Ryan, and William. Fans, John, Matthew, Spyro, JVO, Level 42, Joe, Bloodsky, and Kamal. And supporters, Nos, Sung, Adam, Mr. Hollow, Quickness, Firkin, John, Jay, Sam, and Abhishek for supporting the channel. If you want to support me further, click the join button below this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.